the draft going into the season. And the first team I'm going to highlight is the New York Giants, because a lot of conversation has been going on about the Giants so far after their kind of under the radar offseason that they've had so far. So the big question that I have is, are the Giants actually playoff ready? Now, whether you're a Giants fan or you're somebody that's outside looking in, the Giants, they had a pretty solid signing, or a free agent signing period. They were able to bring in Kenny Golladay, John Ross, Golladay being the legitimate number one wide receiver that you could have, John Ross bringing you kind of that deep threat, burn the top off the defense kind of guy. They bring in the experience of Kyle Rudolph to hopefully maybe help mold Evan Ingram into a legitimate tight end. While Rudolph isn't necessarily the guy that he was maybe 5 or 6 years ago, he was at a point where he was one of the better tight ends in the league in his prime, so he can bring that experience to somebody like Evan Ingram, who has kind of struggled to find his own in the league. He's very talented and skilled. He hasn't been able to take that next step as a premier tight end like the Giants were hoping he would be when they drafted him. On top of that, on the defensive side, they brought in Adoree Jackson, and they had a few other lesser signings that I'm not going to get into because I don't feel they're as important for the team. But overall, with all those signings and hopefully Saquon Barkley coming back off of injury and returning to form, they should look, in theory and on paper, very good as a unit. Now, the question is, are they actually going to be? GM John Mara, in an interview, actually just said to New York Post's Ian O'Connor that he said, "I think our roster is good enough to make the playoffs," quote, end quote. I would say it's debatable. It depends on how you're looking at it. I like the signings they made because they addressed a lot of needs. They lost Kevin Zeitler, their offensive guard, to the Ravens in free agency. That kind of hurts them. But at this point, the Giants' needs are kind of, they're very narrowed down. Adoree Jackson should be really good with James Bradbury on the other side. And then as far as the offensive pieces go, in theory, they kind of round out the unit. You have Sterling Shepard. You have, I believe his name's Darius Slayton, the young guy who was popping off just a couple of years ago. And then on top of that, you also have, like I said, John Ross. You bring in Kyle Rudolph to allow Evan Ingram to kind of, spread out a little bit more around the field and maybe line up more in the wide receiver position as opposed to just strictly the tight end spot, and hopefully, show Ingram how to, be a legitimate tight end threat in the NFL. And with Saquon Barkley coming back, as long as everything goes well, the offense looks very good. I like the setup of it. I've been a big fan of John Ross. I just felt he never had a real opportunity in Cincinnati. It sucks that he kind of had to go as Joe Burrow came in. Who knows what they could have done together as a tandem. But, if Daniel Jones can get him the football, can get Golladay the football, Saquon Barkley, if he can, get the ground game moving, this should be a really good team. And all they need to really do is strengthen that offensive line and protect Daniel Jones a little bit better. I have them going offensive line in the draft for their first round pick, whether that ends up being somebody like Rashawn Slater, Christian Darrisaw, Brady Christensen, whoever it may be. They should be going after offensive linemen should they fall to them at number 11. I think that as far as pass rush goes, there's still a couple guys available. Aldon Smith, Justin Houston. Smith had 5 sacks last year. Granted, he just missed the last 4 years of his career due to suspensions, but it seems like he's kind of put himself on the right path, and he's in position to really, he missed 4 years, but his body also missed the beating of 4 years. So if he's in football form and he's just going to kind of get himself back into the swing of things, and last year was kind of just like breaking the rust off and getting himself moving, Smith would be a solid signing there. He brings kind of a veteran mindset. At one point, Aldon Smith was a premier edge rusher, like the guy at the position. So, he has the experience. Bringing him into New York, if they go, defensive line, offensive line in the draft, he would be good to kind of show the young guys, how to be an elite edge rusher, kind of, maybe give him some secrets on his moves, things like that. But they need to address offensive line more so than anything in the draft. I think that with the offensive, I feel like the offensive line overall in this year's draft is pretty strong. You have some really good players that are coming out that look like they're pro ready to go out of the gate if you're drafting them in the first round and getting some of those top tier guys. If they can go after offensive line and figure out how to fill the hole that Zeitler left behind, the Giants could be in a really good place. I like the way they look. I don't necessarily know if I would say they're going to be playoff bound. I would put them somewhere around, and this is assuming we're having the 17-game season next year, I would probably put them at like 8-9, 9-8, maybe 10-7. They could probably squeak out a few wins. It's the offense that needs to really get going. They averaged 17.5 points last year per game. They've got to be able to put up at least like another 7 points per game. They need to be scoring at least one more touchdown a game to be able to compete, because their defense played really well. Their defense, I believe, allowed roughly like 280, I think maybe 285 was the exact number, 286 points on defense. So the defense wasn't really the issue. It was more so the offense just could not get anything going. They could not really move the ball. They weren't, the defense was playing backed up the entire time, and they were still doing pretty well, holding teams down to low scores. It's just the offense couldn't come through and do anything. So with the defense already being pretty solid, if the offense can take that next step, if Daniel Jones can be the quarterback that New York claims to believe he is, and he's shown his flashes, it's just a matter of, can we take those flashes and make it consistent play? The Giants are in a good spot. I could see them being a number 7 seed, maybe a number 6 seed going into the playoffs next year, as long as all the pieces fall together and they're able to fend off an emerging Washington football team and, what a lot of people are presuming is like the Dallas Cowboys, if they're going to, return to form with Dak Prescott coming back and everything. But the Giants do have they have a legitimate, I would say, like stake to claim as a potential playoff contender in a weak NFC East division, or what we all are looking at as a weak NFC East division. I mean, you could assume that the Eagles more than likely, I'm not going to say aren't, but more than likely aren't going to be a threat, at least going into this season. But the Giants do have a good opportunity to make a push and sneak in there as like a number 6 or 7 seed. So that's kind of how